Hi, welcome to my channel. So as I mentioned last week, today I want to talk about the sleeves of this ball gown that I'm working on. These sleeves are actually way more complicated than I gave them credit for, which I should have known because nothing about this dress has been easy. I have bases that are pretty much done and then I am stuck on the ruff, but I've got a prototype pinned up there for example. So let's go ahead and go into how I made the sleeves. So starting off, I experimented with the poofs, these poofs. And I do want to make a note here that this is not how I would make these sleeves in the future. I would not poof up anything until the end of making these, but I was doing some experimentation on how I wanted to do it. And once I had the sleeve poofed up, I just decided to keep going that route, but that definitely made it significantly more difficult for me because I couldn't machine stitch anything together. If I were to redo it, I would change my order of operations so that I could machine stitch nearly the whole thing together and then add in the poof, but that's not how I did it. So starting off, I was playing around with how I wanted to do this double stacked poof. So in the artwork, it looks more like a droopy sort of gathered Renaissance style sleeves, like Italian Renaissance style sleeve. I don't really know what they're called, but I have the image in my head. But I knew that I wanted to do something a little more structured to go along with the structure of the dress. This dress has a lot of like stiffness to it. So I wanted the sleeves themselves to seem lifted and structured versus sort of like drooping down. So I decided to make a poof that is essentially a gathered sleeve. Patterned this out myself. I experimented with the shape and I cut out the red satin and then I gathered the top and the bottom, stitched in a four-way stretch fabric. It was actually just some random knit that I had lying around for a different project. So I stitched that to the inside to be the inside lining, but I gathered the top and bottom down to fit my arm with, and then stitched that lining in with the little opening. And then I took pillow fluff and stuffed it like a pillow. And I just kept adding it more and more until I got to the stiffness that I wanted. I did want to keep some of this gathered look to it. So I didn't stuff it all the way, but I did stuff it quite full. And then I hand stitched the openings closed. So I made two different poofs, one smaller in size and one a little bit bigger so that you kind of get that drooped effect. And when I was happy with that, I then moved on to these stripes. The artwork definitely seems like the stripes are sewn into the red, which originally I was going to do, but I saw a video recently, and if I can find it, I'll link it, but I saw a video about someone constructing like these Tudor inspired sleeves. I call them cage sleeves. I actually don't know what they're called. They're a type of slashed sleeve where they're essentially like ribbons that are slightly separated from each other so that a gathered under sleeve can be pulled through. And I decided I wanted something like that, but because my gathers are far more stiff, it won't be the same type of look. So what I decided to do was create a sort of faux cage type sleeve by cutting out strips of canvas. And then I cut out some of the pink satin that I used in the front of the skirt, and I just stitched the satin to the canvas. And then the artwork has like a gold border on this. So I took some of the same leather trim that I used in the corset and used that to stitch that onto the edges of these straps. And I just made like a few long straps. And then I went back to the puffs and measured them out directly on the puff where I wanted them to be before I stitched along that line so that nothing came apart, and then cut the pieces apart. And then I had to pin them in place and hand stitch them because the puff is too puffy to fit through my sewing machine. And then, so I did that for both the top and the bottom. And then I aligned the top and the bottom together, and then I had to hand stitch the puffs together. I did two types of stitching on the puff. I did a really secure stitch on the straps themselves because I really want them to look like they're continuous, that I didn't cut them. So I made sure to do a really sturdy stitch for those so that they do not move whatsoever. And I did a ladder stitch along the red satin to pull that together so you cannot see through the puffs anymore, and they look like one sleeve. So that's the base of the like structured part of the sleeve. So the next part was this, and like last week I had that part done except for hand stitching them together, and I really thought the rest of this was going to go way faster, but boy was I wrong. So the inside, which you hopefully can see, is far more complicated than this in my opinion. So the way that I made these sleeves was I actually cut a circle skirt, but instead of making the top part of the circle skirt to the correct measurement of my arm times pi or whatever that calculation is, I actually made it 2 or 3 times bigger so that I could gather it down to my arm size. By doing it this way, it gives me this gathered look at the top, which matches the artwork. It gives me some nice flounce and volume to the sleeve, which is what I was going for based on the artwork, of course. And then once I had the sleeve gathered up, before hemming it, I trimmed it down to the right size so that it is asymmetrical. And then I did a rolled hem along the side. I could not use my rolled hem foot because it is a rounded shape. Do the old-fashioned way with ruler and chalk and manually roll this hem. It's almost perfect. I'm actually really proud of these hems, but both sleeves have one tiny imperfection that hopefully no one will ever notice. I'm getting better at hemming, and I'm very excited about that. So then the next piece to this sleeve is the inside lace. So this inside lace, originally I was going to embroider some cotton with a design that matches the artwork and put that in there, so it is as close to accurate as possible. But to be honest, I am rushing a little bit to try and make it in time for this application, for this contest I want to enter. So I decided instead to purchase something that was close to it. Some cotton fabric with this beautiful lace embroidery. So I took that, and it was white, and the artwork, everything is like a cream ivory color. So I didn't feel like buying dye or going through the whole process of doing fabric dye. So I did something I'd never done before. I used tea to dye this sleeve, and I sacrificed some of the last of my smoky lapsang to get this fabric. So all you do is brew tea in hot water, and I did find that the hotter the water, the better the color took to the cotton, and just set it in there. It dyes so fast. And then I washed it out with some soap, let it dry, determined if it was dark enough or not. It wasn't. I actually dipped it 3 different times before I was satisfied with the color. The color is very close to the cream smocking color. So tea dyeing works, and it actually, even though I washed it with soap, it still smells like tea, which is kind of fun. I had it the right color. I gathered it at the top, and then I pinned it within the gathered red part of the sleeve, pulling in the top a little bit so that it matched the asymmetry of the red before I stitched it all together. This I did on the machine, and trimmed down the excess white cotton from the actual upper sleeve part. So we're still not done. So now that I have these 2 pieces, I decided to go ahead and stitch them to the sleeve puff. Now the sleeve puff, again, can't go through my sewing machine, so I actually had to hand stitch the bell sleeve to the puff. So that's what I did. I did 2 rounds of hand stitching to make sure it's super secure. I did one like just crazy whip stitch on the inside, and then I went and did a finer stitch a little away from that so that you can't see any of the stitching in between the puff and the gathered. So that should be super secure. Now there's another piece to the inner part of the sleeves. I actually originally wanted to do custom lace here as well, because it's like another layer of lace. So I decided to do freestanding lace. Freestanding lace is essentially where you embroider a pattern on some water-soluble stabilizer and wash the stabilizer away, and you get essentially just the thread is left behind, and it's a type of lace. If you want to know how I did it, I did make a video a few months ago, explaining exactly how I did that, and I gave all the measurements that I use in my digitizing software to make sure that that holds together. So I did some experimentations with that, and that is what I wanted to put in the middle. But the downside with freestanding lace is the stabilizer. I'm convinced wash away stabilizer is just some form of glue that's water activated, because it gets very sticky when it's wet, and it's sandwiched in between all of this stitching, both front and back. And so no matter how much I wash it, it seems to still have some in the stitching. And so when it dries, it's incredibly stiff. It feels like it's been glued. It also changes the color of your thread ever so slightly. So I tried pinning that into the inside of the sleeve at the very top, and I was not happy with it. The stiffness just did not fit the curvature of my arm, and I could have redrawn it out and re-embroidered it so that it actually fit the curvature, but I was really happy with that lace. So I decided to nix it on the inside of the sleeve and use it elsewhere. So instead, I dug through my stash. I'm starting to slowly believe in the seamstress's motto of the stash always provides, because buried within my 2 tubs of trims, I found some old trim that I had purchased for, I think, Aurora. I don't remember if I actually wound up using it for Aurora, but I think I purchased it for her. Found this beautiful trim that's some ruffles and some pearls. I'm like, this is perfect, but it's white. It's definitely not a natural fiber, so I wasn't sure how I was going to dye this without ruining the pearls. Again, I didn't want to go through the whole process of actually dyeing it, so I decided to experiment with more tea. So I brewed some more tea. I was fully convinced this wouldn't work, but I dipped it in the tea and it almost immediately took on the color. And I'm like, when I wash it out, is it going to stick? So I let it sit just a little longer than I did with the cotton, and I used super hot water, and it worked. So I'm actually a big fan of tea dyeing fabric now because it's super safe, non-toxic, super easy to do, and it's faster than fabric dye. So anytime I need this ivory cream sort of warm color, I guess I will tea dye it if I feel like sacrificing some of my nice tea. So that works. So I cut that down to size and just hand stitched that along in the inside of the sleeve. So now the inside, the bottom part of the sleeve is done. That is the status of this sleeve. This sleeve is slightly further along. So I wound up taking that lace that I had made, and it matches the lace on the top puff in the artwork. I cut it into pieces so that I could work it around the upper part of the arm, and I pinned them in place. I'm gonna hand stitch those on next. And then the last part of the sleeve is the ruff, which is this part up here. The ruff, I spent all of yesterday and stayed up way too late into early hours of this morning trying to get one ruff done. I really wanted one done for this video, but I did not succeed. So I attempted to make a ruff based on the way the Shakespearean Theater, I think in Chicago, makes their ruffs. So I followed their video. It's super easy. All you do is you take a length of fabric. Theirs was like 5 inches across, and they folded it in half and ironed it. I tried it that way, but the fabric wound up puckering a lot, and I was not happy with the way that that looked. So I decided to only use 1 layer of fabric. So essentially though, you take your strip of fabric and you sew horsehair braid into it. And I actually wound up using my rolled hem foot to finish one end, because you are going to see that in the top of the ruff, and I couldn't figure out, it doesn't look like that they finished that part in the video. It wasn't that descriptive, so I don't know what they do for their raw edges, but that's what I decided to do. I cut 144 inches of fabric from the old ruffle I took off of the previous version of this dress. So I did find a purpose for that ruffle I lost, and I was sort of guessing on the length based on the video. And I did the rolled hem on one edge, and then I installed the horsehair braid. So I wound up choosing a wider horsehair braid than they did in their video. Their ruffs were smaller. And so the way that you install a horsehair braid is right side up, you stitch the horsehair braid down on one edge, and then once that's complete, you flip it over and roll it to the other side, and it gives you a nice rolled hem and hides the edge of the horsehair braid within that roll. And then I stitched it down. And then in some experimentations, I realized that it was still getting some fabric puckering, so I did another stitch really close to the first one to try and hold that down. And then I tried the next part of their video, where they take 3 needles with 3 long pieces of thread, and they marked it 1.5 inches. I actually did 3 inches because the 1.5 was just too small. They marked dots in 3 rows evenly all the way down their ruff. And I did mine 3 inches apart, and then you do over under with each needle. So every row gets a needle, and you go just up and then down into the next hole, and then up through the next hole, and then down to the next hole. That was a pain. I hated that. I could not keep my needles straight. I had no idea which needle was what. I'd do the stitches and I'd pull the gathers together and be like, oh crap, I have to untangle my needles. And then the horsehair braid is so stiff it would pop the ruffs right back out. I tried pinning it and I couldn't get it to stay in place, so I tried it 2 or 3 different times yesterday and I could not get this technique to work. And I don't know if it's the fabric I'm using or what, because like their video, when they gather it together, it stays together. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. It's not super descriptive, but I did figure out my own way where essentially I just hand swirl the fabric and pin it in place. That's what I did here. And I just wanted to see what everything looked like before I made decisions. So that's what I did. I just hand swirled and then put pins wherever I'm going to be stitching it. And I am happy with the way it looks. I do need to measure out better every fold so that they're all even. So that's what I actually did this morning, was just finish out part of the ruff so I could see what it looks like. However, it's too wide. I thought I was going to like it, and whenever I have this width of ruff on the sleeve off the mannequin, it looks fine. But when you put it on the mannequin, the shape changes a little bit because, you know, an arm is in there pushing things out. It's way too big. So I need to trim it down and try again. I might be able to salvage this one because one of the biggest problems is, again, there's a ton of puckering, and I don't know if like, is it the fabric I'm using? I'm using satin. I've seen videos of people using satin before. I'm like, did I cut it wrong? Like, I don't know why I can't get this puckering under control. However, maybe if I make it smaller like I need to, maybe the puckering won't happen. Or I tried to anchor it down onto the other side of the horsehair braid and it just was not working. So I do have some more experimentation to do with the ruff and some edits before I can hand stitch that on. But for now, you can get an idea of what the sleeve is going to look like. And the ruff just popped off. But you can get a nice idea of what we're going for. So that was last week. I know I say this a lot, but I really am getting close. So what I'm going to do is run my embroidery machine, because I still have the front panel to make on this bodice. And I've designed some embroidery for it. So I'm going to run that this week so I can prep all that material while I finish up the ruff. So next week it probably won't be super exciting, but I hope it is. Hopefully I will be coming back with 2 complete sleeves and at least the starts of the front panel here, because then I just need to do the neck piece and then the crown and the wig styling. And then the dress, minus of course the finishing stitching, because I'm being very lazy on going back to that. Then the dress will be done and I can move on to the gauntlet and the staff. Now I will say I am flip-flopping back and forth on whether or not I want to compete in a couple of months in this, because I really want the gauntlet and I really want the staff, and I just don't know if I'm going to be able to get everything done in time for the application and then also in time for the contest. If I wait until the other contest I want to do, which is in October, I can definitely get this finished and get it finished to the way that I want it. We'll see what I decide on, because I do keep going back and forth. One day I'm like, let's apply. The next day I'm like, I should wait. So we'll see what I do. But that's where I'm at right now. I hope you like this video. If you like this video, make sure to hit the like button. Make sure to subscribe for more content from me. And please hit the hype button. Apparently you can hit it like 3 times in a row, and that will get this video out to more people, which would be super awesome. So with that, I will see you in my next video. Bye.